So let's talk about HTML5 local storage. Now this is one of those new components in HTML5. And what local storage really refers to in HTML5 is the storage of data, any sort of maybe site data, session data, user data at the local device, and this device could really be anything. As long as the device has a HTML5 compatible browser, you can store data at that local device. And so this could be a browser on your phone, this could be a browser on a laptop, a PC, anything of that nature. So as long as it's a HTML5 compatible browser, you can store a pretty decent sized amount of data at that local device. Now previously, when we think about data, user data, transaction data, session data being stored at the device, we think about cookies, right? And the fact that like 5-10 years ago, people used to be concerned about, not even 5-10 years ago, like 10 years ago or so, people used to be concerned about cookies and cookies tracking individuals and their behavior over the internet. And so cookies had their issues. Typically they were fairly small. The amount of data that you could store in a cookie used to be fairly small, and it was always required that a cookie be transmitted and retransmitted between the client browser and the server. So there was always kind of communication, a cookie-based transmission that was taking place. And cookies had this negative connotation, right? This idea that there was something that's present on your computer that's being transmitted and is being used to track you, and so there was this perception problem around cookies, and so there were all these issues around previous ways in which to accomplish data storage at the local device. And so HTML5 came about with this idea of using an object, a local storage object that is part of the browser, right? And this object can store can store data, and again, this data is based on the data stored is obviously going to be determined by the kind of script we write and things of that nature. And so this local storage component has been implemented across a variety of different browsers. IE8 has support for it, Firefox, Chrome, Opera, Safari. A variety of different browsers support this local storage object. Now, this local storage object is really a way to store two pieces of data. One of those pieces of data is called the key, and the other piece of data is called the value. So it's really storing data as a key-value pair. Now, if you all remember Java that you all did in Internet Programming 1, and if you remember the concept of hash maps in Java, right? The concept of hash maps was data stored in a hash map, and a hash map, just to refresh your memory, is very similar to an array list in a way, where whereas in an array list you used to have the keys as specified index values and the value as user determined. In a hash map in Java, you determine what the key is and you determine what the corresponding value to that key is. Similarly, the local storage object in HTML5 stores data as key value pairs, where you specify the key and you specify the value corresponding to that key. And now this is a very powerful idea, because what it allows us to do is searching an array list in Java used to be very problematic, but searching a hash map based on a key is very easy, because you're going to get that value corresponding to that key. Similarly, in the local storage object, when we want to find the value corresponding to a key, we all only really need to search for like this one thing, the key that exists in the local storage object. And so storing it as a key value pair, there are several advantages to that, right? And so data is stored as key value pairs in the local storage object. Now, you can contrast local storage to session storage, because there's also a session storage object that is present in HTML5. The difference between the session storage object and the local storage object is that the session storage object stores the data for only one session, where one session refers to an instance of the browser being open and then being shut down. So after the browser is closed or closes, the data is lost, right? So the data doesn't exist for beyond that session. And so there are lots of similarities between local storage and session storage, but the biggest difference is that you lose the data after your session is complete. For local storage, however, the data persists across multiple sessions. The data persists for as long as you want, unless you actually clear the local storage out, which you can also do, right? Okay, so what are some use cases for kind of the local storage object in HTML5? And really, it's used to store web service data. Large data sets, like fairly large data sets, tend to get stored in local storage. Location data gets stored in local storage. And if you want to store user configurations for interfaces and things of that nature, restoring that interface based on stored data can also be, you can use local storage for that. And so there are a couple of different use cases for local storage, but they tend to have to do with the scale of data and the size of it that you actually want to store, because retrieving data from a web service and API can be problematic, can be troublesome, and so you might use local storage to kind of store that data. Okay, now HTML5 has a variety of different methods that allow us to work with kind of the local storage object, right? One of the key methods is the method called setItem, and the setItem method basically allows you to set the key value pair in local storage. So you would have to specify the local storage object, such as localStorage.setItem, and you would have to specify what the key was and what the associated value was. In this case, both of those are strings, right? And so that's my take on a string right there. So and you can also do that to retrieve. You can use the getItem method to actually retrieve the value associated with the key, right? And so you would again refer to the local storage object, localStorage.getItem, and you would specify the key. You can also use the remove item to remove a value associated with the key. You'd also be clearing out the key itself, right? And now you can also use the .key method. The .key method refers to allows you to refer to a certain position, right? A position in the local storage object, right? The first thing obviously gets a position of 0, then 1, then 2, then 3, then so on and so forth, right? And so you can retrieve the item at the ith location, and you could use a for loop or a for each loop to retrieve all items, all keys, and all values from the local storage object. Now, there are a couple of quirks that you got to keep in mind regarding local storage. The thing is that local storage only stores string data. And so you could ask, well, how can you store object data? Well, to store object data, one of the things that you're going to have to do is you're going to have to convert that object data into a string, right? And so you can use the stringify method of JSON to actually convert an object array to a string, right? And so you'd have to use the setItem method. You'd specify the key, and then you'd have to have the JSON.stringify method to convert your object array into a string. Now, as you are retrieving the string and converting it to an object, one of the things you'd have to do is you'd have to use the JSON parse method. The parse method would actually retrieve the string and convert it back into an object, right? And so this is one of those quirks of local storage that it's a good idea to keep in mind, and you guys can mess around with. What I want to do right now is to actually walk you through kind of an example of using local storage and a way you would actually work with local storage in your browser. So hold on while I get Visual Code started up.